The moment I saw the red and blue lights flash behind me, I knew this was going to get ugly, but I never imagined how fast a simple parking dispute would explode. One minute I was loading groceries into my car, the next an HOA board member was screaming about authority, laws, and a so-called master key that supposedly let her access anything she wanted. Her name was Linda, though everyone in the neighborhood called her HOA Karen behind her back. She marched toward me with a laminated badge, a clipboard, and the confidence of someone who had never been told no. She said my car was illegally parked in a common area. I calmly explained it was my assigned spot. She didn't listen. She never does. Instead, she pulled a shiny key from around her neck and announced she had a master key for all vehicles violating HOA rules. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. She tried my door. It didn't open. She tried again, harder, rattling the handle like she owned it. People started watching. When the key failed, her face turned red with rage. She accused me of tampering with HOA property, threatened fines, towing, even arrest. I asked her to step away from my car. That's when she pulled out her phone and dialed 911, loudly telling the operator a resident was aggressive and interfering with HOA enforcement. I stood there in stunned silence while she painted me as a dangerous man refusing lawful orders. She didn't know my job. She didn't know my patience had limits. And she definitely didn't know that lying to emergency services was about to ruin her afternoon. As we waited, she smirked, confident the police would put me in my place. Neighbors whispered. Phones recorded. I kept my hands visible, breathing slowly, letting her dig her own hole. I'd seen this behavior before, just never aimed directly at me. When the patrol car finally pulled in, Linda rushed forward, talking over herself, demanding my arrest. The officer stepped out, looked at me, then froze for half a second too long. Recognition flickered across his face. Linda didn't notice. She was too busy celebrating what she thought was her victory. She had no idea that the badge she worshipped was sitting in my glove compartment, or that the man she tried to humiliate was about to teach her a very expensive lesson about authority, respect, and calling 911 over a parking spot. That quiet pause, right before truth surfaced, was heavier than any shouting, because power shifts silently, and moments like that expose who hides behind titles, keys, and empty threats when real authority finally arrives without warning or mercy whatsoever. The officer cleared his throat and addressed Linda first, asking her to step back and explain the situation calmly. She launched into a dramatic monologue, waving her clipboard like evidence, insisting I had violated HOA regulations, resisted enforcement, and acted aggressively when she attempted to access my vehicle with her authorized master key. She said it loudly, confidently, like repetition could turn fiction into fact. I stayed silent, watching the officer's jaw tighten. He glanced at me again, then at the patrol car behind him, clearly processing something. Linda noticed none of it. She demanded charges, towing, immediate removal from the community. She even suggested I be trespassed from my own neighborhood. The entitlement in her voice drew more neighbors outside. When the officer finally spoke, he asked a simple question. Ma'am, can you explain why you tried to unlock a private vehicle? Linda scoffed and said HOA authority overrode personal property during violations. She claimed legal backing, contracts, bylaws she clearly misunderstood. The officer asked to see the so-called master key. She proudly handed it over. He examined it, then tried it himself. Nothing happened. He looked at her, unimpressed. Linda's confidence wavered for the first time. She pivoted, accusing me of sabotaging the lock. That was when I finally spoke. I told the officer I wanted this interaction documented and asked for a supervisor to be notified, given the false statements made to emergency services. Linda exploded, shouting that I was threatening her, demanding I be detained immediately. The officer raised a hand, firm but controlled, and told her to lower her voice. He then asked me, quietly, if I wanted to explain my side. I nodded and reached into my glove compartment, moving slowly, exactly how I'd trained hundreds of people to do. I pulled out my wallet and handed him my identification. He looked down, then back up at me, eyes widening just slightly. He stepped back, straightened his posture, and addressed me differently now, with respect. He said my title out loud. Sheriff. The word landed like a dropped plate. Conversation stopped. Phones lowered. Linda's face drained of color. She laughed nervously, insisting it was a joke, some kind of trick. The officer assured her it wasn't. He apologized to me for the inconvenience and asked if I wished to proceed with the report. Linda began backtracking, claiming misunderstandings, stress, miscommunication. But the damage was done. She had called 911, lied, attempted unlawful access to private property, and created a public disturbance. Authority doesn't announce itself loudly. It waits, then speaks once. And now, everyone was listening. Linda's knees practically locked as reality settled in. She kept glancing between me and the officer, searching for some loophole, some magical HOA clause that could undo what she'd just done. Her voice dropped several octaves as she started apologizing, the same mouth that had been shouting now trembling through forced politeness and fake smiles. I asked the officer to keep everything professional. No yelling. No revenge. Just facts. That request seemed to confuse Linda more than anything else. She expected anger. She expected me to flex authority. Instead, I asked her to explain, calmly, why she believed she could access a resident's vehicle with a so-called master key. Under pressure, her story unraveled fast. She admitted the key wasn't for cars at all. It was for shared storage units. She'd assumed it would work on vehicles too. Assumed. That word hung heavy. The officer wrote it down carefully. Then he asked why she told the 911 operator I was aggressive. Linda hesitated, then said she felt threatened. The officer asked how. Silence answered. Neighbors began speaking up. One mentioned past confrontations. Another recalled her threatening fines that never existed. Someone else quietly shared a video showing Linda yanking on my door handle. Each piece stacked neatly against her. Power hates witnesses, and today, she had plenty. I finally spoke again, not loudly, not angrily. I explained that abusing emergency services puts real lives at risk. That lying to police isn't a scare tactic, it's a crime. I told her I didn't enjoy moments like this, but accountability mattered. Titles don't grant immunity. They amplify responsibility. The officer informed Linda she was being cited for misuse of emergency services and attempted unlawful entry. Her clipboard slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the pavement like confetti from a very different kind of parade. She asked if this could be handled internally through the HOA. The officer said no. As she signed the citation, her hands shook. The confidence was gone. The crowd slowly dispersed, the spectacle complete. I thanked the officer and told him I'd follow up officially later. He nodded, understanding exactly what that meant without another word. Before leaving, Linda looked at me, eyes glossy, and asked quietly why I hadn't just told her who I was from the beginning. I answered honestly. Because respect shouldn't depend on rank. That answer hit harder than any arrest ever could. The patrol car pulled away, but the tension didn't leave with it. It lingered in the air, thick and uncomfortable, like everyone had just witnessed something they weren't sure how to process. I finished loading my groceries, aware of eyes still watching from behind curtains and cracked doors. Authority had shifted, and people were recalibrating what they thought they knew. By the next morning, the neighborhood group chat was on fire. Screenshots, voice notes, half-truths, and wild speculation flew around like sparks. Linda hadn't wasted time. She framed herself as a victim of intimidation, claimed she'd been humiliated publicly, and suggested I'd abused my position. She never mentioned the false 911 call. She never mentioned the key. I stayed quiet. Years in law enforcement taught me that reacting emotionally only feeds the noise. Facts surface on their own when you let them breathe. Still, I documented everything, saved videos neighbors sent me privately, and filed an internal note. Not as revenge. As record. 2 days later, a notice appeared on every door. Emergency HOA meeting. Mandatory attendance. That alone told me how deep the panic ran. When I walked into the clubhouse that evening, the room fell silent. Board members sat stiffly at a folding table, Linda in the center, eyes fixed on her notes. She spoke first, rehearsed and defensive, talking about safety, procedures, and misunderstandings. Then she mentioned my name. She said residents should feel safe reporting concerns without fear of retaliation. That was my cue. I stood, calmly, and asked to speak. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't reveal new accusations. I simply walked through the timeline, step by step, and played the video of her trying to unlock my car. Gasps rippled through the room. Then I read the citation aloud. Silence followed. The board president looked physically ill. Questions erupted. Linda tried to interrupt, but the room had turned. Once people see truth clearly, it's hard to stuff it back into a lie. A vote was called to suspend her authority pending review. It passed unanimously. As people filed out, several neighbors thanked me. Not for being the sheriff. For being patient. For standing firm without bullying back. That mattered more than any badge. Linda left last, shoulders slumped, power gone. She didn't look at me this time. Some lessons echo longer than sirens. The fallout didn't end with that meeting. In quiet ways, it spread through the neighborhood like cracks in ice you don't notice until you hear them splitting. Linda stopped walking her usual inspection routes. The warning letters vanished. The tone of HOA emails softened overnight, suddenly full of words like cooperation and community. A week later, I received a formal request for a statement. The HOA's legal counsel wanted clarification about the incident, the citation, and whether I planned to pursue further action. I told the truth. I had no interest in dragging this out. My goal had never been punishment. It was boundaries. What surprised me was how many neighbors reached out privately. Some shared stories far worse than mine. Threats over trash bins. Fines invented on the spot. Cars photographed and posted publicly as violations. They'd stayed silent because Linda was loud, relentless, and confident. Authority, even fake authority, scares people when it's unchecked. I encouraged them to speak up, to document, to attend meetings. Not because I was the sheriff, but because this was their home. Power thrives on isolation. It weakens when people compare notes. 2 weeks later, Linda resigned. No speech. No apology. Just a brief email citing personal reasons. The board announced reforms, new oversight, clearer limits. They acted like this had come out of nowhere. It hadn't. It had been building for years. One evening, as I walked my dog, a teenager from down the block jogged up and asked if the story was true. I nodded. He smiled and said his mom cried watching the video because someone finally stood up without becoming a bully themselves. That stuck with me. Being the sheriff means carrying authority even when you don't show it. Knowing when to speak and when silence is stronger. Linda thought power came from keys, rules, and fear. She was wrong. Real authority comes from restraint and accountability. I never wanted to be the main character in a neighborhood drama. But sometimes, moments choose you. And when they do, How you respond teaches everyone watching what kind of power matters. Somewhere along the way, this stopped being about a parking spot or a key. It became about reminding people that no title excuses disrespect, and no rule overrides basic decency. And that lesson was worth every second of discomfort. Life slowly returned to normal, but normal felt different now. The neighborhood was quieter, not just in noise, but in tension. People waved more. Conversations lingered longer. It was like a pressure valve had finally been released, and no one realized how tightly it had been wound until it loosened. For me, work continued as usual. Calls, meetings, long nights. But the incident followed me in unexpected ways. At the station, deputies joked about the master key legend, but underneath the humor was something serious. It sparked conversations about authority abuse, about how often uniforms or titles get mistaken for permission instead of responsibility. One afternoon, a deputy asked why I didn't immediately shut Linda down when she started yelling. Why not flash the badge and end it in seconds? I told him the same thing I believed deeply. If respect only exists when someone fears consequences, then it isn't respect at all. It's compliance. And compliance disappears the moment power isn't visible. A month later, I received a handwritten letter. No return address. Inside, Linda apologized. Not the polished kind meant to erase guilt, but clumsy, uneven sentences admitting fear, control issues, and embarrassment. She wrote that she'd confused order with dominance, rules with worth. I never replied, but I kept the letter. Accountability sometimes begins quietly. The HOA elections came and went. New faces. Open forums. Limits clearly defined. No master keys to anything except shared storage, clearly labeled. Policies rewritten in plain language. Transparency became the new buzzword, though this time, people actually meant it. One evening, during a routine patrol ride along with a rookie, we passed my neighborhood. He asked which house was mine. I pointed it out. He looked surprised. You live there? He asked. Looks normal. I smiled. That was the point. Power should never tower over people's lives. It should blend in, only noticeable when it's truly needed. Linda wanted to be seen. She wanted to be obeyed. In the end, she was neither. The lesson stayed with me long after the headlines faded. Authority without humility is just noise. And the loudest people often crumble the fastest when truth finally speaks calmly. Some stories end with sirens. Others end with silence. This one ended with something better, balance restored, lessons learned, and a reminder that even in small places, integrity matters more than control. Time has a way of shrinking moments that once felt enormous. Months passed, and the incident became a story people told new neighbors, a kind of cautionary tale wrapped in humor and disbelief. You should have seen her face, they'd say. I'd just nod and change the subject. I never wanted the story to define me. What stayed with me wasn't the spectacle, but the pattern. I started noticing how often small authorities overstepped in subtle ways. A parking attendant barking orders. A clerk threatening rules they couldn't explain. A manager hiding behind policy to avoid basic kindness. None of it illegal. All of it unnecessary. Power leaks when empathy dries up. At work, I used the story during training sessions, stripping away the names and drama. I focused on the pause, that moment before revealing who I was. I told deputies that every interaction is a test of who you are when no one knows your title. The badge doesn't make you right. Your choices do. One night, responding to a noise complaint, I met a man shaking with anger, convinced everyone was against him. Instead of shutting him down, I listened. 10 minutes later, his shoulders dropped. No cuffs. No threats. Just a conversation. As we left, the rookie with me said, I get it now. That was enough. Back home, the neighborhood slowly stopped talking about Linda altogether. That, more than anything, felt like closure. No villain. No hero. Just a lesson absorbed and moved past. Communities don't need dominance to function. They need trust. Sometimes, I still park in the same spot. Same car. Same routine. No one bothers me. Not because they know who I am, but because boundaries are respected now. That difference matters. People assume the most satisfying part was the reveal, the moment she realized who she was dealing with. It wasn't. The most satisfying part was never having to raise my voice, never having to threaten, never having to become the thing I was confronting. Power can correct behavior, but character changes culture. That day could have ended with handcuffs and humiliation. Instead, it ended with reflection. And reflection lasts longer than fear ever could. The truth is, most conflicts don't start with bad intentions. They start with someone feeling small and trying to feel bigger by controlling someone else. Linda wasn't born an antagonist. She became one slowly, through unchecked power, applause from the wrong people, and the absence of consequences. That's usually how it happens. I've thought about that a lot since then. Not just as a sheriff, but as a neighbor, a citizen, a human being. Every system, no matter how small, reflects the values we tolerate. HOAs, workplaces, families, departments. When people stop asking questions, authority hardens into arrogance. Long after things settled, a new family moved in across the street. During their first week, their car was parked slightly over the line. Old habits would have triggered warnings, notes, threats. Instead, another neighbor knocked, introduced himself, and politely mentioned it. The car moved. No drama. No fear. That small moment told me everything had changed. At work, I continued emphasizing de-escalation, humility, and patience. Not as soft skills, but as survival skills for trust. The public doesn't remember statutes or procedures. They remember how you made them feel when they were vulnerable, confused, or scared. That applies everywhere, not just policing. Every so often, someone recognizes me at the grocery store or gas station. They thank me for that HOA thing. I always redirect the credit. The neighbors spoke up. The truth surfaced. All I did was refuse to misuse authority when it would have been easy. I've learned that real strength shows up quietly. It doesn't need keys, clipboards, or laminated badges. It doesn't shout rules. It listens. It waits. And when it finally speaks, it does so with clarity, not cruelty. If Linda learned anything, I hope it wasn't just fear of consequences, but understanding of limits. Power is borrowed, never owned. The moment you forget that, it slips through your fingers. That day in the parking lot could have gone 100 different ways. Most of them ugly. The one it chose wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And honesty has a way of repairing things force never can. In the end, the story isn't about me being the sheriff. It's about what happens when someone assumes authority without accountability, and what happens when that assumption meets quiet, immovable truth. And that lesson doesn't belong to one neighborhood. It belongs everywhere. By the time chapter 9 begins, the neighborhood had fully recovered from the chaos, but the echoes of that day lingered in subtle ways, quiet reminders of boundaries, respect, and consequences. Linda was gone, her authority revoked, her lessons painfully learned. The HOA operated with transparency now, but more importantly, the residents understood their collective power. I walked my usual route past the common areas and parking spots, observing neighbors going about their lives peacefully. Children played without fear of overzealous fines. Cars were parked, but not policed obsessively. The balance had shifted. It wasn't about dominance anymore, It was about community, accountability, and mutual respect. At the station, deputies often asked for details about how I handled the confrontation. My answer never varied: patience, documentation, and awareness. Reacting emotionally to perceived power grabs rarely produces justice. Calm authority does. That day became a case study not for punishment, but for restraint and responsibility. A teaching moment disguised as chaos. Months later, I received another note, this time from a neighbor I barely knew. They thanked me for standing firm, for refusing to escalate, and for showing that power could exist without intimidation. Small gestures, written words, they reminded me why restraint often matters more than authority. Leadership isn't about showing force, it's about showing integrity consistently. I thought about Linda sometimes, not with anger, but with a sense of clarity. People like her aren't evil. They're unchecked. They confuse compliance for respect, keys for control, and noise for authority. It was a stark reminder that anyone can become a hazard when power outpaces humility. Parking spots, HOA keys, board meetings, they were trivial compared to the lesson learned. The real story was about human behavior under perceived authority, and what happens when someone refuses to be bullied, even when it's easy to react. One evening, I sat on my porch, reflecting on the past weeks. Neighbors waved from across the street. A child called hello from the playground. Cars moved slowly past the curbs, no one anxious, no one panicked. That quiet order, the kind that emerges naturally, without fear, was the true victory. Linda had underestimated what happens when authority meets accountability. I hadn't set out to make a scene, to punish, or to humiliate. I simply stayed calm, observed, and acted within bounds. And in doing so, I restored more than a parking spot, I restored a community's faith in fairness. In the end, the lesson was simple: titles, keys, and loud voices are temporary. Respect, integrity, and patience endure. And that is a power no master key can unlock. If you enjoyed this story and want more jaw-dropping real-life experiences, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Have you ever dealt with someone like HOA Karen? And don't forget to like the video if the story shocked you as much as it shocked me.